Welcome everyone. Today I have a special guest. Can you present yourself?
Hi, Amnon. Hi, everybody. So I'm Anna Maria. I'm originally from Poland, but I have been living abroad like for 16 years. I'm a full-time nomad. I speak 6 languages, I would say fluently. I can also speak like in 2 others. But the funny thing, I guess, like for the audience, is that actually I learned my first foreign language when I was 22. So I absolutely didn't start as a kid. I couldn't speak anything when I was young, just my native language, which is Polish. And I'm also not, I would say anyway, like language related. I am not teaching language. I'm not translator. I have a different career. I have a life.
But then a little question, because if you were 22 years old, so I guess you learned perhaps English in school, but you were never able to speak it, I guess?
Yeah, so that's actually one of the challenges, right? Like we had like several years English, but I couldn't speak at all, like even basic conversation. So the only thing we knew, like I would say in theory, some grammar, but we were never like hearing, we were never practicing. I would say that the education, at least in Poland at this moment, for foreign language, when it's public education, is not very good. So if you really want to learn something, you have to do either in private academy schools or by yourself. And actually the same is so in Spain. People also like learn. They have like 10 years in primary school, then the secondary school, right? And then nobody speak that. Like when the foreigner arrives and they ask like 3 questions, people are like puzzled completely. So like I would say like this official learning, especially when you are not able to speak, and then for real skills, it's like completely different words, I would say. So and that's why I was not able to speak anything until I was 22 and went first time abroad.
So what went wrong? Let's say in the school system according to you, or like what was wrong in the learning, let's say?
I think that the system is completely wrong, at least the traditional ones, because it's all the time all about grammar. In Poland, it's a lot about grammar. So first of all, you completely lose motivation, right? Like when there is so much grammar before you are even able to make any sense out of that language. Second, there is completely like, lack of, I would say, understanding that you need to speak and hear. So almost like just like studying grammar, doing some exercises all the time, which like I would say in some way people completely disconnect from the reality. So they know how to do exercises, but then they are not able to say a few sentences on the street to a stranger. So that is what was wrong. We had 0 chances to practice whatever at the time when I was still living in Poland. I think that I was born in a very small village, so there was absolutely no foreigners, nobody to practice. There was only school, which was not properly.
But you were not in contact with people. You could never practice it, let's say.
No, and think that even internet was not a thing like it is right now.
True.
When I was a teenager, when I was a kid, internet was something not that easily available for us. Not everybody had a computer. I think there was really not that many opportunities, and the one that you had, which was like the public education, was not done properly. And as much as I know, even now is still not done properly, at least the traditional education part.
Okay, I thought things changed at least a little bit, no? Because like nowadays, if you go to Poland, I do have the feeling younger people speak English, or am I wrong?
They try. So I think like probably the newer generation, they are, I think they have just more possibilities. Perhaps it's not even like the public education, but I think like, now everybody has the access to internet, they watch the movies. So they have some chances to talk to foreigners. They are not only relying on public education, which was my
makes
case.
sense. Makes sense.
But
Yeah, of course. Yeah. And so then you were 22, and then you, let's say, learned English like seriously. So how? What was your strategy and your method?
Actually, I first learned Spanish. I went to Spain.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I went to Spain. So I was studying for 1 year before I went to Spain. But when I get there, so the same happened to me as with English. I couldn't hold a basic conversation because I was not understanding what people were speaking to me. I had like some, I would say, base in my head, some grammar, understanding of some words, but I was not able again to hold a basic conversation. People would say like, how are you? Where are you from? And I was like, what that person wants from me, right? So at the same time, I just decided to stay there, like look for a job, like find an apartment. So people were speaking all the time in Spanish. Nobody would speak English.
Where was it in
So it
Spain?
was like
Where you went, by the way?
In Barcelona.
Barcelona.
So that was like a jump in the sea directly without knowing how to swim. But actually, I was fluent in Spanish after 8 months when I did that. So yeah. So we have to notice that I did had some grammar base, I would say, before, but like speaking, that took 8 months. But I was speaking like every day, and I really had a need, right? So the motivation was
no
huge.
Choice. Yeah, you have to.
I would call to people and I would say, "Hi, I would like to book a room," and they would reply in Spanish, and I was not understanding. I went to the job interviews, and I was not even able to understand how much they are going to pay me. So I would say to everything, "Yes, yes." So and then every day I would come home and like check the new words and try to practice the conversation that I would really need. And then next day, I would really talk to people like what I just learned, like literally next day without waiting.
Wow, that's amazing. So like exposure, the difference was like, instead of having grammar that it's abstract, doing exercises, it was like you had the need, no choice. People were answering in Spanish, you needed a job, I guess, and then you were just getting the input. It was difficult, but let's say over 8 months you were able to function in a society within 8 months, you would say?
Absolutely.
Wow.
I was even working after 8 months as a receptionist, which was the person that would receive, right, guests, like first person of contact in Spanish, of course. Then what I would probably add to this, so this is like kids learn, right? The kids doesn't try to understand the complex grammar and why we say that way and not the other. They just repeat, and they just try to communicate. And only when they are like 7 or something and they go to school, then we explain them why actually we are doing that way, right?
Yeah.
So then it's always shocked me why we are teaching adults the other way when we clearly see it doesn't work.
Do you believe, however, that, for example, let's say I want to learn Polish, for example, it is on my list, but okay, let's say I first start to just speak or learn basic things, and a little bit like you did in a, let's say, more like input way, listening and trying to speak. And then once I'm perhaps not fluent, but when I get to an A2 level, or like when I know the basic vocabulary, basic grammar, then I can learn the grammar still or understand how it works? Or do you think you should never learn grammar?
No, I think you should if you want to speak like well and have like rich vocabulary. And I would say it's like on the way, right? You are at the same time talking to people and trying to improve. Like for instance, for me, I was also reading things in Spanish when I tried to learn Spanish, like doing my ordinary life in Spanish, right? I was reading the newspaper. Yeah. And then if I wouldn't understand something, then I would go and check. And at the same time, I was also like seeing how they actually use that grammar, right? Because that's the grammar you really need when you are reading newspaper, not the book. And so I think it's like ongoing, like you are learning and then you are checking like why it's exactly that way. So yeah, probably there is some way. Maybe when you are like intermediate, if you really want to be fluent, and I would also say like, speak, have a rich vocabulary, speak correctly, and probably like take that to the next level, then of course you need to go deeper into the grammar. But I also think that you have much bigger chance to succeed by then because you have much more motivation, right? You are already speaking, right? You are speaking, and people are actually praising you for that, right? Like I got like so many compliments like that I was speaking after 1 year. So then I have like, yes, let's do that even better, right? So yeah, absolutely yes, but I just wouldn't start there. So I would say like for a start, in my opinion, as less grammar as possible, that keep you going. So probably there is some basic, right? You need to learn like these basic verbs to say whatever and how they decline, if they decline, right? So that you need. But I also, in the beginning, I would just learn the phrase that I need. Like for instance, I, and me, and you. And I wouldn't bother about any other declinations because for now, that would be what I would say, right? Like I need a job. I'm looking for a room. Can you repeat that? That's all I need to keep going. And then it's also easier once you figure out a little bit, like to remember, okay, and then if you decline, it will be this way, right?
Yeah, no, that sounds really good. Do you also use methods? Let's say if you want to learn, I don't know, your next language, if you want to learn another language, would you buy a method as well and a book, or how do you go from the beginning, let's say?
Yeah, I think for the beginning, yes, because you need to know something, right? Like even to go on the street and start talking. So I bought like some Spanish books, easy ones, and I try to like, but ideally the ones that there was like lots of text, not so many exercises. So I'm just like, trying to memorize as many and possibly the whole sentences, not just words. And then searching immediately for places where to implement what you just learned. And then, of course, you get back to your book and you figure that out and you get improving like on the way, but you don't really learn. I mean, like, don't wait until you learn something to start using that, right? Like Benny Davis, I think he's saying that you actually can speak after half an hour of learning, but people like thinks like, oh, I still don't know anything, like to join any meetups or any practices. Let's wait until I get better. But the problem is, if you don't practice, you never get better. Look at me. I was 22 and I couldn't speak, right? Because I was waiting for the right moment to practice.
Makes sense. Or even I also think I've spoken to other people as well, and I do also know people who don't prefer to talk immediately, but let's say they prefer to have a little bit of a base, which I think can also be, but at least not wait like a whole year, for example. Like, after a few months, let's say if you study 5 days a week or 4 days a week, and then you learn the basic, But of course, and then it depends on the personality and the people. But I do know for sure it's possible from day one or quite quickly already to use the language, I think.
So I also think there is a huge advantage in just being exposed. So for instance, when I would decide like learn Italian, I would just decide to go to aperitivos, right? And there were like Italians, and I couldn't say that much in Italian by then, but it was still beneficial for me to be there and hearing how they talk. I think that's huge. That really speeds your progress. So then, like if you can say something, then you jump into the conversation. If you can't, you are still learning. And I believe that part is like super important, which you can't just get if you are sitting at home and maybe using like any application or just book, like being around and just hearing how they really talk. Because if you only learn like the written words and then it doesn't sound exactly the same as you have learned, then it's just complete disconnect. Then you go to the meetup and you actually, when people lose the motivation, because say, I was studying like 1 year and I can't get a basic conversation, right?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And then when you say Italian, Spanish, I also believe, like I think I told you before that when people ask me, for example, how do you learn languages? It also depends on which language, because if you have a high command of Spanish, then let's say with Italian, you can very quickly read books and things, and like, it doesn't mean you can speak it. You can quickly, and then as you said, listen, and even if you didn't understand it all, but sometimes you can participate, sometimes not. But as you say, then you also learn. So that is also a super important thing. And I think when we, for me, this is just for me, talking from day one, I think like if it's a language, like for example, I learned Slavic languages. I'm now in Bulgaria, Bansko, and I speak Russian, for example. So for me, being in Bulgaria, I could quite quickly take a newspaper and everything. Doesn't mean I can speak super well, but I could already from the start sort of practice it. But then let's say if I'd learned Hungarian, then I mean, honestly, I could not guess in the beginning anything. So then I think for me, at least, it was better to, let's say, at least a few weeks, just learn some words, some basic, get used to it, and perhaps then go on to it. But yeah. So yeah. Well, by the way, we also spoke about applications. What do you think of apps? When you learn this?
Yeah, everything can be helpful, but it's also a matter how much time you have, right? To do that. So what I usually do when I try to learn something, like recently I started learning Russian, because despite many people think that Polish people speak Russian, we don't. So it's
not the younger generation. The older generation does.
Absolutely not. Very basics, even like my parents, very basics, not much.
Okay.
So like I don't have like the time, for instance, in this moment to say like, oh, every day I study 1 hour or whatever. So I try to incorporate that into my daily life, right? So if I have to read something or do something or talk to people or join some event, I try to already do that in that language if that's possible. Like if you, for instance, speak one language, what you say about Spanish and Italian, then possibly you can already understand some part if you, for instance, try to read something basic, right? So
Exactly.
I join like some Facebook groups. Maybe I cannot read newspaper, but I can read a question and a few replies in that language and understand. And then I didn't really dedicate any time, because this is something that I would do anyway. Do that in the language that I want to learn. And so this is also what I really want to learn, because that's what I will be using, right, in my daily life. So I try to focus on the practical part, at least at the beginning. That will, I would say, start you going like really fast and being able to understand. And then the books, like you must have some base, right, to start somewhere. So that's great. But for instance, if you can also watch a movie, maybe just like having subtitles and trying to understand already in the language that you are learning, and maybe you wanted to watch the movie anyway, right, or try to read something, or just go like to the place where people are speaking that language. So for me, it's like doing two things at once.
Yeah, true. Yeah, you enjoy it, and as you said, when the subtitles are in a language that you already know, and then at least even I do think it makes a lot of sense. I did that for Turkish, for example. So I watch YouTube channels with English subtitles, but then listening in Turkish, and it would be too overwhelming to understand everything. But then with the subtitles, and this way I got little by little lots of words, and you hear it, so you get used to it.
Yeah.
And so by the way, is Polish for you, as of now, between Polish, Russian, do you think it's a bit like Italian, Spanish, or is it not that easy as people might think?
I think they evolved more. Actually, Polish and Russian are the most distant language from the Slavic family.
Really?
They quite evolved. So they started like once from the common ground, but then actually like Ukrainian, Belarusian, Czech or Slovak is closer to Polish than Russian is.
Okay, good to know.
So you still of course have some base. It's not the same like for me to learn Russian than for a Spanish person, for instance.
Yes, of course.
But it's completely different language, which if I'm not exposed to, I can't understand, right?
Okay, good to know. And it's also not that easy as you like for example, like Spanish, Italian. Again, it's also different. There are differences, but I think it helps a lot. I think that's then closer.
Yeah, I think Spanish and Italian are closer than Polish and Russian.
Interesting. Wow, very nice. And did you also, because I know you were in Bansko, Bulgaria often as well, I don't know if you learned a little bit of Bulgarian, but how is Polish Bulgarian? Is it also quite different, or?
It's different. So there are some Slavic ground in Bulgarian, right? But then there are all these Balkan influences, which we don't have at all.
Sure.
So I would be able like to understand some words, but not much more. Like I think with Russian, I could have much better base for Bulgarian than with Polish.
Okay, interesting. Wow. So as our topic of our book is boosting language myth, thank you very much for sharing all these things. I think they will be very, very useful for a lot of people. So what I understood from you, like input is very important, expose yourself. If a language is closed, then just go into it right away or as soon as you can, because you will guess and understand a lot. If not, then perhaps learn something.
Yeah, and
also expose yourself.
Yeah, there is one more thing that I also used to say. So because people have somehow this impression, they are very afraid of making mistakes. They are ashamed to speak, right?
Oh, yes.
Which I think it's completely unnecessary, because in reality, native speakers also make mistakes in their own languages.
Totally, yeah.
So like Polish speakers, they make mistakes when they write because the grammar is difficult.
Oh yeah, and the spelling. Oh my God.
English people like Spanish native speaker, they like the subjuntivo, they continuously confuse that and use that in a wrong way. So then like, why are you thinking that you as a learner, a new learner, should speak perfectly if even the native speakers can't do that, right?
Good point.
And to add to that, people, they don't pay that much attention to your mistakes as you think. Like I have been doing presentations, in different languages, which I don't even speak perfectly. And everybody actually, instead of criticizing, which people could be like afraid of, they actually praise me for even doing that, right? Because they are happy that I made that effort, and I try to say that in their own language, right? I have like better potential for connection, because native language is emotional connection, right? The learned language is rational words. So when you want to communicate, you have much better chance to get understood, or to get your message through when you speak in the language. Even if it's imperfect, that will still give you advantage over speaking in a perfect English, which people don't really understand, right? Because people are really attached to their native languages. Like you probably noticed that especially when someone is not expecting, but you say something to them in their native language, they, the face illuminates and they are like so happy, right? And this is like such a small thing to do, like just learn one expression and use that probably when they are not expecting that, right? So the only thing I believe is important, for instance, with presentations or when you maybe work in a language, just set the right expectations, right? So I come and I say, so hi, I have been like learning Italian for 2 years. My Italian is like maybe B1, but I'm gonna give that presentation in Italian, right? Yeah. And that's important because if I don't say anything and they just come and the people like, oh, she's doing presentation in Italian, then they will expect perfect Italian, right? They will assume, and then they will criticize me because oh, but her Italian is not so good, right? So I have to set the right expectation and I have to let them know this is what you can expect from me. And then what I deliver match the expectations, right? And they are happy that you are doing that and they appreciate that. So I think that part is sometimes missing also when people try to work and then they get criticized, or maybe people like point their mistakes because they didn't make that clear for their audience that they are still in the learning process and they are doing huge effort and huge work here.
Yeah, and exactly, and people, especially if your audience is like full with people who are not necessarily used to learning languages, perhaps they learned English, but that's it, and then they don't really understand that, or they think like, well, you're living here, or yeah, they don't know the whole process. So yeah, it's a very, very, very good point to mention. So I was just wondering, so a lot of people on YouTube, as you know, they want to learn languages quick. Well, I always believe it's a process, and it's actually a lifelong process, I believe. That's even your native language in a way, because I'm sure you haven't lived in Poland for a long time. I also haven't lived in the countries of the language where my native languages are spoken. So even then, I think it's a life, like a long process. So, but do you think, like, besides all the things that you said, are there ways how you can learn faster if you need it?
Yeah, so I mean, of course, depends like where you're starting, right? What language? Probably if I start now to learn Japanese, it's gonna take me longer than Portuguese, right?
Exactly.
But still, I think the same principle applies. Like you have to dig into that, like leave by side all the shame and just start talking to people like as fast as possible. Just don't expect it to be perfect in any way. Like if you get your message across, if people got it, that's actually perfect. That's fantastic. Just like keep going. Like when, for instance, I tried to learn Italian or Portuguese, so I exposed myself and I was going out with people and I wouldn't really understand much of the conversation, right? So, but that's not very comfortable situation to be in, of course.
True.
Because conversation going on, you don't get them. You can't also like ask for every single word what they mean. You can't like stop them all the time and make them repeat. But if you do that, actually, you make such a huge progress in a few months that you are never able to do that if you just stay home and learn with books and applications, because you are involved in real life, and then suddenly you start to understand more than you would expect because some click happens and you are connecting like the words to the meaning. So I think like the exposure for me is the fastest way, like a complete exposure. And probably ideally in situation when there is no other option. So if you go to Spain, you have to learn Spanish because nobody really speaks English. Like there's no other chance. So you will not get like the job, you will not find the flat, you will not get what you want to do if you don't speak that. So that's easier because there is not that temptation to change to English when it's too difficult for you, right? So if you put yourself intentionally in a situation where you must speak because you just committed to something and now you can't get out of this and there is no other option, that's gonna really makes you progress fast. And and I think you also need to get comfortable to being I would say uncomfortable in that kind of situation, at least at the beginning. This is to wait until you are comfortable and understand most of the conversation. That's like perfectly fine if you understand something and contribute like a little bit, because you are making huge progress if you keep doing that. Like I, for instance, for Portuguese, right? I again bought the book. I learned a little bit like A1 basics. Then I went to Portugal. I couldn't understand anything, of course, but I did like for 3 months. Like I was listening to the, I would say to the movies, and I would go out with people and they would talk. And after 3 months, like suddenly there was like, aha, this is, and I was getting everything, right? But this 3 months was kind of pain, right?
Yeah.
So I think this is the fastest way, right? Like I didn't really spend years like studying in any language school. Actually, I abandoned most of the official courses I started. I was just doing things in the language I wanted to learn, and at the same time, I'm always trying, like, you know, to check when I don't get something. So I check the words, like I listen how people say that, so I can improve.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. And then, as we all know, even if if you're not able, let's say you need to learn Spanish and you're in another country and you do not have exposure to the people, you can always, like, there's platforms where you can find tutors, teachers. And what I personally do sometimes, if let's say, like now I'm in Bulgaria and I didn't want to forget my Turkish, so sometimes, let's say I listen to people if they speak English or whatever language, and then in my mind I summarize it in Turkish, or if they speak slowly, sometimes not for too long, but like 10 minutes or here and there throughout the day. And I believe that, for me at least, it helps me as well if I want to advance faster. That said, so time-wise, I think if you do these challenging things, it goes faster. That said, as you probably agree with what you said, but also my example now, for your brain, it's very draining. It's much more challenging.
It is draining, but in the beginning, now that you mentioned that, in the beginning when I was learning Spanish, for me it was very hard to switch, even to my own language, right, to Polish. So switching between English and Polish when it was my first language was like a really headache for me, like it was so hard. But then your brain gets like more flexible when you do that more, and now it's actually easy to talk even 5 languages in the same day and switch like effortlessly, right? So your brain is very flexible. And that's one of the advantages of even learning. So it comes easier, like each next language will be easier. The first, actually, the hardest one. But I think it's mostly the hardest one because deep inside you don't really believe that you can speak that well. So that mental barrier is what slows you, actually.
Yeah. And it can be a long journey, like even for you. Okay, you were in Spain and you were exposed, but can you imagine 8 months of exposure and only then, I mean, speaking, I mean, no, it's fast, but I mean to say 8 months, or even if it's the first 5 months, it was still very difficult to sit. It's still a long time every day, because every day you work in a way on it. So that is also what a lot of people, what I've seen around me, then they give up. But yeah, you should really.
Yes. Because and that's why I think that has to be like highlighted, that this part is probably you have to pass through that, and that's gonna end. You know, it's not gonna be like that forever. I think they give up because they think, I have been studying so much, and usually when they start to be exposed, they have been already studying like 1 year or 2 years or 3 years. So for them, it's even more. It's not just 8 months, right? Maybe by then it's 3 years, and then I'm not able to understand. I can't do that. That's too difficult. That's why they give up. But if they are aware already about the process, that's gonna take at least a few months. If it's first language, maybe more than half a year. But that's gonna end at some point. Like if you keep going, then probably they would have like better motivation to actually get there. If they already, there's like seeing a light in a tunnel, right? That's gonna end, right?
True. But then when you were in Spain, like the motivation was there. I mean, you just didn't have a choice. No, you needed a job. You needed
I mean, it's a risky way of learning, but of course, if you have a real need, right? Like at work, I mean, people always make those jokes, but it's very true. If you find a partner, right, someone you are interested in romantically, and they speak different language, you already have a motivation to learn, right?
Also. No, that's totally true, yeah. Okay, well, that sounds really good. So thank you for your time. Is there anything else you'd like to share or about language learning?
It's just like for people, I would like more people to believe that it's not as hard as it looks like, and probably like the first one is the hardest, but then you actually your brain like learn faster, and then you can really progress if you believe you can do that. I encourage people to do that. and yeah, believe that this can happen actually sooner than they think.
And there are so many benefits to it, no? Even though, as you say, the first one might be a bit difficult, that's like the people you can meet, but also the flexibility of your brain, no? You said that in the beginning, even between your native language and Spanish, it was hard to switch, but now it's like effortlessly between 5 languages. And I think also, whatever your field is, your job is, I also think that you learn to learn faster, you're more flexible. I mean, there's so many advantages to it. And then if you're a digital nomad, I think you can also, let's say if you're a freelancer, you need clients, sometimes it can also be an advantage if you do not only work in English, but also in Spanish, or let's say Kazakh, the whole market opens. So there's so many benefits, and people you meet, because even if they speak English, but let's say when I was in Turkey, just by speaking Turkish, first of all, I could speak with people who do not speak English. And then second, the people notice you more, no? Like also business-wise, friendship-wise, everything.
You have completely different relationship with the person if you are able to speak the language. Even if you speak English and they speak English, like for instance, speaking Italian to an Italian person, it's completely different than speaking in English in them. So you are much more likely to get the business deal. You're much more likely to find friends. And generally, like your experience will be much more positive. In work, I can't even like stress that enough, because it's huge. People actually, work is often difficult enough. So if people can work, like the clients can work in their own language, you actually make their life easier. And people are willing to pay for that. I have been seeing that, right?
I agree. Okay, well, for the first video, thank you very much. So yeah, well, it was really great, and let's definitely have other talks as well.
Thank you.
So okay, thank you for the talk.